Welcome to the RPG Podcast.
And we are live.
Oh, God, Patton!
Presented by SHEATH. A Time Wheel production.
Welcome, everyone, to the Robert Patton Global Podcast. I'm Robert Patton, and I am here with Jason Grechanik. And you were introduced to me from my brother, and you're in like the spiritual community, and that's kind of, I believe that's correct. That's kind of our realm of existence, like spirituality, enlightenment, personal growth, success, and these types of things. So it's always cool to talk to someone who's doing this similar things, and we can kind of learn from each other.
Yeah, I was Mike Broncatelli recommended, I think, myself to you, and we met. I was working, or I still work, but this was a couple of years ago when I was working in the Amazon, and Mike actually came down to the center where I work, and we work with plant medicine, kind of indigenous traditional plant medicine, and yeah, I met Mike there, and he's a great guy, and he spoke pretty highly of you and your brother. So
Yeah, it's such a small world because Mike actually used to work for Gas Digital Network. I didn't know that until we were doing the actual podcast, and it's kind of one of my favorite shows.
was that a Dave Smith show?
Yeah, Dave Smith.
Okay, yeah.
It's it's political, but in light of everything going on, it's kind of interesting to keep an ear to the ground as far as politically and culturally what's happening in the United States and around the world.
Yeah, well, that was one way Mike and I think, connected pretty early on. Was we both have a lot of respect and are very interested in these libertarian ideals.
Same, very much so. The same for me. I remember when I don't know how old you are, but I think I might be a little bit older, but I was about 16, and Ross Perot was kind of getting into the mix with George Bush and Clinton, and that whole election I was paying attention to. And I guess I've always kind of been drawn to it, maybe because my dad used to listen to talk radio when I was in the car, and he was into it, so I'm into it. And this is kind of the new talk radio also, if you will, which I've always I always wanted to do, but never. I tried really like a very tiny little effort. I went and knocked on the door of a radio station to go see if maybe they would give me a job, and that was the effort I put in. Nobody answered, and then I never tried again. But I've learned that kind of effort's not going to get you very far. You got to really be persistent in what it is that you're doing. But like, how did you end up in the Amazon?
Probably a long story. I mean, it's probably the culmination of many things in my life. But for a long time, I was very interested in plant medicine. I think just medicine in general, but especially via the means of plants. And that really got me interested in things like nutrition and a lot of more, I guess you could say, traditional practices like traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, things like that, herbalism, European herbalism, American herbalism. And that was fascinating. But I think at a certain point, I also realized it was very similar in many ways to our allopathic kind of Western medical system, where various plants were being used to treat illnesses. If there was a symptom, there would be a particular plant that could be used to try and either alleviate that or ideally to cure it. But I had heard of this plant called ayahuasca for a long time. One of my really good buddies was part of the Santo Daime Church, which is a really big Brazilian church that incorporates ayahuasca into their religion. So I had known about it for a long time, but I had never really felt that drawn to work with it. Yeah, I think I kind of had this idea that everything I needed was inside myself, and I kind of didn't need to reach to this outside substance. Um, but serendipitously or synchronistically, it just started coming up a lot and more and more. And then it reached this point where it was just almost this kind of overwhelming calling to work with it. And so I ended up down in the Amazon in a retreat center, and I worked with ayahuasca for a number of ceremonies, and really had just a profound experience. And it was, I mean, the experience itself, I never really could have imagined the exact details, but it really put me in touch with something that I had always felt was possible, but had never really experienced on that experiential level. And so it really just opened me to a new way of being. And I'd always been interested in religion and spirituality and shamanism, and it really just opened to a different world of perception and how to heal on other layers that weren't just necessarily physical, which a lot of plant medicine is just doing. It's working on the physical level, at least in the way it's often administered. But this really just opened a whole new world. And so once I had those initial experiences, again, kind of serendipitously, I was offered a job because the center where I went was expanding, and I'd been wanting to get out of New York for where I was living, and this really just seemed like the opportunity. And so I came down and I started working, and that was probably about 8 years ago now, and it turned into something that's continued as a big part of my path and journey now.
It's interesting because I have been sort of drawn to these types of plants, or it's like why are we drawn to this? Why are we looking for something else? Like, what's wrong with us inside that we need to look elsewhere? Because I've always been, I'm either reading books or trying new diets or trying something like breathing exercises, yoga, like anything to feel content. Like, why can't we just feel content? And yet some people
Mm.
do, and I'm like, what's wrong with you? You're content.
Well, I think it's, I mean, I was very similar, and everyone has their own path, obviously. But I mean, the more I look into it, I think this type of work was actually at the essence of all traditions, of all spirituality, of all religion. And I think it's an innate desire that exists in humans, these kind of existential questions that we have of who I am, what's my purpose, where do I come from, where do I go to. And I think that comes to people in various stages of their lives. There are some people who maybe are just very determined and set in something, and they're putting all their energy into that, whether it's a career path and family. And maybe those questions come in a more subtle way, or maybe they come in a stronger way towards the end of their lives. But I think everyone at some point has to come to terms with these questions. I mean, that may be, on our deathbeds, where we have to come to terms with those. And I mean, I think anyone who's been part of that dying process with someone, they have a sense of that in that dying process, there's a lot going on. And so I think a lot of these paths are just really an opportunity to begin to really delve into those questions while we're still alive. And I think it's, again, it's really, I mean, I see this a lot in my work, but I think potentially one reason why these plants are becoming so popular is that, in a sense, we've lost them, and we're in a process of remembering these traditions and these ways of being. And that essentially, to be a human being, this is part of that. It's part of that journey, whether it's these coming of age ceremonies or initiation rituals, or vision quest, becoming a man, becoming a woman. There's
Mm-hmm.
actually something really fundamental in that, and that we've really gotten away from in many of our societies. And I think because of that, there's a lot of suffering in different ways, and it's a bit difficult to put our fingers on because it's maybe not necessarily so tangible or so measurable. We can't, look at a statistic and say, oh, well, this person is lacking something, but it's kind of this deep felt sense that something isn't quite wrong or something isn't quite right. Something is missing. There's more to life than going to work and doing these things and buying these things and
Mm-hmm.
kind of moving up the ladder. And those things are all important. They're certainly valuable, and it's not to take away from them, but I think many people are beginning to realize that there's something else that I need to complete my life. And I think in that way, these plants really offer us one path to begin to explore that.
I had so many thoughts were coming through my mind as you were saying that, like the initiation process, or becoming a man or a woman, going from a child to adulthood. And as Americans, for the most part, a typical American would not have that culturally embedded in this. It's like your upbringing, but like the Jewish culture, for instance, has something where they, what is that called? A bar mitzvah, when the boy becomes a man. And I feel, I know in Mexican culture, they have like a quinceañera, and I'm not sure that it's
Hmm.
exactly the same, but most normal Christian Catholic types don't have that. And, so when do you become a man? And for me, I was 26 and I joined the army, and I went through basic training, and I went through AIT, and I went to war, and then and I'm like, okay, now I'm a man. But before that, I don't think that I was an infant. I was a child, still behaving like a child. I mean, I had a
Hmm.
job, and I had a kid, and so maybe having a kid is another kind of stepping up point, but not, that doesn't happen for everyone. And that's another, I was thinking so many thoughts. Another thing that was coming up in my mind is like, I know this young man right now who had a kid about a year ago, but he doesn't have a job. He smokes weed all day. His wife works like 20 hours a week. They have about 20 days before they get kicked out of their current home. And it's like, it's looking like they're going to be going to a homeless shelter with their kid. And I'm like,
Wow.
how can you not, how can you sleep, or how are you not waking up with like a panic and like a rush to go do something to not only take care of yourself but your family? Like, I couldn't even fathom that type of mentality.
Hmm. Well, I think very much. I mean, I think as you described, that's it's interesting. An author who I like a lot, his name is Steven Pinker, and he wrote a really good book called Enlightenment Now. And it just kind of talks about from all of these different ways that we measure quality of life and well-being. We live in the greatest time in recorded human history. I mean, our
Mm-hmm.
lives are very easy compared
Mm-hmm.
to most of human history, and that's a great thing. It's that's something I think we always really need to remember. But like everything, there's a good and a bad to that, and one of the downsides is I think without that struggle, like you said, it's we maybe don't have these initiation rituals and these points where we become a man. And certainly throughout human history, especially for men, war was certainly one of those. I mean, that very much, I think, shifted and changed how someone was, and potentially a lot of trauma, but also potentially a deep appreciation if one emerged from that, a deep appreciation for life. And um, I mean, I practice martial arts. I'm a big fan of jujitsu, and I think especially for young men, that's That's a vital kind of coming of age thing, is really learning what that means to embody oneself and to compete, and in a mini sense to go to war kind of day in and day out on the mat, and there's a humility that comes from that. I was also Boy Scout, and I think that was invaluable.
Nice.
One of the final things, it was called the Arrow of Light, and they kind of drop you off in the middle of the woods, and all you have is a knife, and you have to. They
Nice.
come back and pick you up after 3 or 4 days or something. I mean,
Wow. I didn't know that.
that was a few decades ago. They probably can't do that anymore. It's probably
No.
considered child abuse, but absolutely, and I think these plants, in many shamanic traditions, they really emphasize this idea of death. And as you were saying, this idea of giving birth, which is the counter side to that, the birth of a child, or sometimes the death of a loved one, or the death of a parent, but also, as you said, not everybody necessarily goes through that, and I think these plants really give people access to that. I mean, even the plant I mentioned, ayahuasca, with that's a Quechua word, and one of the translations of that is "vine of the dead." And in so many of these shamanic paths, I mean, if I really had to boil them down to one word, it would be it's a path of death, of dying, because in that dying process, in that initiation rite, where one is often very literally knocking on death's door, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, when one emerges from that process, when one emerges much stronger, wiser, with an embodied sense of a deep appreciation of life, and I think that is something that's just it's really invaluable, and it's like we were talking about, I think it's something that for many people is missing in their lives.
It is. And you're like, seem to be very well rounded and cultured, and thank you again for coming on here to talk to me, because this is really cool. Because like, I feel like you found the answer in this conversation already in the first 18 minutes by saying, like, well, bringing up jujitsu and martial arts and the challenge of that, and what I would think of as, being submitted and tapping out and then getting back up and doing it again, is something that a lot of people don't go through. A lot of people don't go through that difficulty of challenge and in getting submitted, and then just being humbled, I guess, if you will, and kind of knowing what your real potential is. You're like, okay, I just got stopped. That guy could have killed me. He didn't kill me, but like, I could have just died right there. And that to me was an extremely valuable experience, and I've been kind of doing that on and off throughout my life as well, which it's that could be the initiation process for young men and women in America to go through, but it's not mandatory. It's like, it's an option, and most people don't choose to do that, although it is growing in popularity. I feel like if anyone's out there listening and you're not practicing martial arts, you're missing out, because it's so gratifying. I'm having a young MMA fighter, Dylan King. Shout out to Dylan King. He comes up a couple times a week to train me, and just hitting the pads and rolling, it feels good. It feels right. It feels like it's supposed to be that way. And we're so disconnected these days, particularly, that we're not getting the full experience of life when you're not going through that physical connection.
Absolutely, yeah. It's and I think especially for young men, it's even where I am working in the Amazon, I work with a group of people called the Shipibo, and many people, I think, don't really realize, but If I was to ask most of the curanderos, the doctors, the shamans, what their path is, what they're doing, most of them would describe themselves as guerreros, which essentially is a warrior, and they're battling, they're working through things in that altered state of consciousness, and it's not always love and light and unicorns, and hopefully we emerge with that, but that process it's a process of really battling and trying and failing, and as you said, getting up and even the Spibo, their traditional festivals involve wrestling. That's their traditional craft. Both the men and the women, they they get really inebriated and they wrestle each other. And there's something, I think, very freeing in that.
It's energizing and you feel good. There's something, not maybe not euphoric, it may not be the right word, but it definitely is a feel good experience. When you get done, you're like, oh, I don't know.
Yeah,
You're awake,
absolutely.
you're alive, right? Just feeling alive.
Yeah, and we're
To the
human beings, we're physical, and I think that's also, as we were saying, what's kind of maybe lacking for a lot of people. The plant work can help a lot with that, and I think that's also why things like jujitsu are really just increasing exponentially, is because people feel this need and this relief and this, as you said, there's a humility that comes from it. There's so much wisdom that comes from it, and just in the physical level, it's a huge release, and I think so really so many problems could be resolved if people just participate in that way, because as you said, there's this release of energy, that there's a humility, and when you're done with jujitsu, the last thing you want to do is fight or have conflict. It's you're spent, you're humbled, and you're content in a way,
at
and
peace.
I think so many, yeah, you're at peace, and I think so many of the problems we're dealing with, it's actually a lot is just this pent up energy. I mean, I go on
Yeah, everyone's
Facebook and
screaming. Everyone's just like
exactly,
in a rage. And if they would
exactly,
just hit well, I mean, not hit someone, but maybe get hit. Like Fight Club was such a powerful movie when I was younger. Like I was like, I want that. I want to get in a fight. And I think this might be taboo, whatever, but like we could settle our differences in fights, like physical fight. Go fight your enemy or whoever you're disagreeing with, and I guarantee at the end of it, you'll both have some respect for each other. You know,
absolutely, absolutely. I mean, that's
but
one
that's
of the things that I
taboo.
think people don't realize. With martial arts, or you look at something like MMA, I mean, guys maybe shit talking, and I mean, part of that is part of the sell too. But often there's a genuine dislike because you're about to step in the cage with someone. But almost always, inevitably, at the end of that match, there's a tremendous respect, a humility, a brotherhood. A lot of the guys end up training with each other after, and
Hmm.
there's a bond that's formed where you get everything out, and then you have a tremendous respect for that person.
I mean, how many of us had that experience as kids, like fighting with some kid, and then, you end up being maybe not best friends, but definitely, friendly or whatever, respectful of one another going forward, because it's like, okay, you're you're not no bitch, and I'm not either, and there's something to that, but it's like illegal, and it's totally looked down upon if you're physically violent. I mean, obviously you don't want to be bullying anyone, but if it was a mutual kind of agreed upon match of physical, not intercourse, but like just a fight or something,
Yeah,
then
absolutely.
you could resolve a lot of differences. Take out the guns. I'm pro gun, but not necessarily. Like I think just for like protection, obviously, and if we could settle our differences in a way that nobody would be dead at the end of it, and you might have a busted lip or something, then we could move on, but nobody would be like fatally hurt. If I was president or something like that, I think I would make an executive order to have jujitsu, martial arts as a resource, and kind of like maybe not mandatory, but very highly promoted as a positive benefit for just growing up. And in Israel or whatever, they have that 2-year obligation of military training. Maybe we don't have to do that, but if you did martial arts, and that should be the recommendation for police officers and just everyone. Everyone can benefit from this experience, and it's not promoted enough yet, but hopefully maybe we're moving in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people probably don't realize, but a lot of people think that the origins of martial arts that it actually arose from monks. It was a spiritual practice, and I mean, even the name martial arts. I remember, I think it was a few Oscars ago. Meryl Streep stood up, and she went into some anti-Trump rant, and she said, if we continue down this path, everyone is just going to be watching football and mixed martial arts, which we all know are not arts. And she starts, this silly laugh, and I mean, it's such a crazy point of view where she's at an award show for an art form, and she's literally calling martial arts not an art, and it's this real lack of understanding. And I mean, developed by monks because they saw it as a spiritual practice. It was a path to wisdom, to enlightenment, and through the body, through the mind, through discipline, through focus, through repetition, and it has all of the qualities one would need in a discipline that actually leads to, as you said, to peace.
Yeah, I'm feeling relatively inarticulate today, but that's okay because you're picking up the slack. But the shit has been around for thousands of years. These guys are doing it for a reason. Like the Chinese Qigong, which is something like in Tai Chi, for people are probably more familiar with that. I think it's relatively similar enough to get the point across. Is the movement of the body and these motions is, motion is medicine, movement is medicine, and doing these breathing exercises along with movement can really transmit into peace within. And I guess yoga is kind of similar. I prefer Qigong and Tai Chi to yoga for, I don't know why, I just do. I feel more powerful afterwards rather than just kind of more relaxed. So I guess you would use them for different things, but the breathing, the movement of the spine, and getting everything flowing is something that you don't get when you're sitting in a cubicle at a desk moving your fingers. Like you have those little finger movements aren't getting it done, people.
Yeah.
Type. So
And Tai Chi is a martial art. I mean, a lot of people don't realize that, but Tai Chi it's a martial art. It's for martial purposes, and yet with that, there's all of these amazing benefits: breath and movement and flow and meditation. And but that's the same for all martial arts. I mean, I think a lot of people look at jujitsu and they're like, it's just two people trying to beat each other up, but in the highest level, you watch a black belt, you watch two black belts rolling with each other, and it's all about leverage and conservation of energy and breath and this flow state. And I
the
mean,
flow state.
it's beautiful. If one really understands the art, it's beautiful to watch.
Yeah, I love the flow state. But you have to get that repetition, and you have to get that practice in. It's not going to come to you right away. You know, you were talking earlier about ayahuasca and and like the death experience, and how, and like, and coming back from that is like a reawakening. I kind of switch subjects a little bit real quick, but I wanted to express an experience I had with that through DMT. And that's, you know, the smokable version, basically, for those who don't know, of ayahuasca. It's much more fast acting. And some people like maybe have done it, but I don't know if they've broken through. But like, I've broken through the barrier of this body, and I don't know if it was real or not, but I left this body and I saw myself above, and I traveled to another dimension where there was these jesters, and they were drinking tea in like a glass house, and the jester, like when I peeked in to, I like popped in, he turned to me and he looked right at me, and he put his finger to his mouth, and he just went shh. He like did the shh, and that's all it said. But what I gathered from that, because I got it like telepathically, what his intention was, is we got this over here on this side. It is here. There is another dimension that exists, but you're not supposed to be here right now. It's like, go back to your dimension, you know, do what you got to do there. We'll be here making sure everything's running smoothly. But from that experience, mostly I got that consciousness could exist outside of the body, and therefore death isn't something to fear. Whether and whether that's right or wrong, and whether we just go into darkness, that I'm fine with that. But I like to think that it got rid of my fear of death. Like, and not that I was ever really that afraid, I guess, but that's one of people's biggest fears, besides standing on stage and talking in front of people. And to experience that is also, you know, like martial arts, another vital component to just self-awareness, and, you know, like freedom from fear, which is another thing about martial arts that was actually one of the biggest benefits I got when I first started doing jiu-jitsu. And I was like 20, and my friend was taking a class, and he would come to my house and teach me, because I didn't want to pay for the class, which it's worth the price. People just pay the $100 or whatever. Like, trust me. But like, at the time, I didn't think so. But he would come and we would roll, and he showed me how to get, you know, like in the guard and past the guard and all those things. And just that little bit helped me stand up taller, put my chest out, you know, not be afraid when I'm walking down the street of anybody. I don't care. I felt like no matter how big someone was, I would never have this. I felt like I could always at least protect myself or defend myself. And that alone, getting rid of the fear that a lot of people maybe walk around with, maybe even unknowingly, it's so invaluable. And that, you know, that's kind of what this podcast is about, is just like trying to discover the best way to go about life in the most, you know, non what's that? It's like, you don't want trouble. I don't want trouble. I kind of want to go downstream and float downstream, and the path of least resistance, if you will. But you got to put yourself through the fire first before you can have that experience. And you know, a lot of us go through it, and it's like the luck of the draw, where you're born, who your friends are, and, you know, what ideas you think are important or not. And, you know, they push education and college and get a job and do all those things, but nobody's saying meditate, do martial arts. I mean, not nobody, but the people in power, like who talks about that? Not any. Like Joe Rogan, obviously, like he's the guy. And it's spreading, thankfully, through the internet, and us all being connected. There is benefit through this. We're talking right now, this connection through the ether. Somehow it works. I don't understand it, but that's how you and I probably even learned about these things, because I was already in my 30s before I even heard about like ayahuasca and these other medicines, but nobody's promoting it and until like podcasts and stuff, which
Yeah.
it's so we're living in like you said earlier, like one of the greatest times. Steven Pinker, I've heard his name so many times. I should probably read that book you were talking about. What is it
Yeah, he
called?
wrote a great book called Enlightenment Now. And
Yeah,
yeah,
there it is.
I'd highly recommend it. But as you were saying, I mean, also from my experience with this work, I've had the opportunity to work with thousands of people now, and I think fear is really the primordial emotion that holds us all back. And some of us, we may realize what our fears are. Many of them are unconscious, and fear manifests in many different ways. It's not always just this kind of debilitating, out of breath kind of state, but I think it really manifests in anything that we would call a negative emotion, whether that's anger, jealousy, or judgment. But almost, I would say, well, not almost, all of our ailments arise out of that fear, and I think that fear is natural. I mean, in a more spiritual way or a religious way, it comes from that primordial split, the fall from the Garden of Eden. This idea of duality, that there's a me and there's a not me, and that's an amazing thing. It's the manifestation of the world. It's duality, and in Chinese terms, the Tao gave birth to the one to the two to the 10,000 things, and that split is it what allows me to exist. It's what allows you to exist. There's a me that's separate from something else. And through that separation, there's the observer and the observed. And that allows the world to be made manifest. It allows us to experience all of the highs and the lows and the joys and the pains. And it literally gives birth to life. But the downside of that is, whether people are aware of that or it's something subconscious or unconscious, is there's this deep down knowing that, or even a longing to return towards this whole state, towards this union, and fear is what keeps us from that, because as long as we believe that we are separate from everything else, there's this unknown, and that unknown is terrifying to people. It may manifest in very obvious ways, but most often it's in very subtle ways. And we mentioned the kind of this political climate. I mean, that's a deep manifestation of fear, of this sense of I exist, I'm right, others are
Mm.
wrong. I need to impose my will on other people. I need to change other people, because if I don't, who am I? And we become so identified with our thoughts and our beliefs that ultimately, in an extreme case, we're willing to kill people. I mean, that's the origin of wars, that I'm so right that I'm justified in killing another person because my belief is real. And just a tremendous suffering arises from that, again, whether we're aware of that or we're not. And so kind of that archetypical hero's journey is the journey into the cave to confront the dragon. And
Mm.
I heard recently, and it's really beautiful, because I'm really interested in etymology and the roots of words, and dragon, it actually comes from serpent. I mean, a dragon is a type of serpent. It's a winged serpent.
Hmm.
But the etymology of serpent is it actually means light, and it's the light that's reflected. And so, this hero's journey of going into the cave, ultimately, it's not battling something outside of ourselves. It's like holding up a mirror, and that light is reflected back off the mirror. And so it's really a journey into ourselves, and overcoming that perceived darkness that we projected onto the outside world. We create these dragons, but ultimately the hero's journey is the journey inward, and conquering the darkness within ourselves, and emerging into the light. And fear is the biggest roadblock. Fear is the thing that holds us back. And so, yeah, as you were saying, all of these modalities that can begin to work on that, to question that, to go into that, are super, super valuable.
And we're so just we live in such a nerf ball society. Everything's so easy, like you said. It's hard to go on a hero's journey. There's nothing left to discover. There's no horizon to go beyond to find a new land or something. And so these plant medicines are one way to kind of experience that journey, which is which, like you said, is an internal journey anyways. Even if in the past they weren't using medicines, they were actually doing the thing that would give them that experience, like doing the thing, like going and conquer, just going into the cave, if and seeing what's in there, conquering your fears through actual leaving your tribe and going out on your own. You were talking about the hero's journey. I love Joseph Campbell. I don't know if that's if he's the one that kind of coined that phrase, but that guy, if you haven't watched Mythos and Mythos 2, those I watched them a number of times, and they were so fascinating. And he was, if he was alive today, that would be you. And he was such a, like an oracle or some, it's just a wise man that shared all of this historical stories of the meaning of life or the hero's journey. I think a lot of that has been lost, unfortunately. And, these medicines can give you that experience, but you can't just, not everyone has access to that, which is why I was saying about martial arts. That's another way to get rid of some certain fears about others maybe harming you. And it's, I don't know, it's complicated. Life is complicated, but it doesn't have to be, I don't think. Maybe we overcomplicate things, and for anyone to think that they're right with all, it's like, you might be right for you, but you to say that your way is right for someone else, all of a sudden now you're imposing yourself on someone else, and that's not right, in my opinion.
Well, that's the fascinating thing. We were talking about these ideas of libertarianism, and that's actually the root of that philosophy, which is non-aggression. It's this idea of, have any belief you want, have any practice you want, but once we start imposing that on someone else, we're being an aggressor. And I think we often don't think about that. We, again, as you were saying, we think that I'm right, and I'm so right that it's my duty and my, kind of like revolutionary authority to impose that on everyone else. And it's really, it's an insane belief system.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah,
I would
and
like, it's a form of insanity, or I feel like they're crazy. Like, to think that they are right. It's like, how can you're being like the fascist or something, it's like, don't
right.
do that. Let people be themselves and let them do their thing, as long as they're not imposing on you or causing harm to you. What's the problem?
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, no, you have to submit to whatever I'm saying, or you're wrong. And I'm up here in the mountains. I'm like looking down from my ivory tower at what's going on in the world, and I'm just gonna stay up here until all the dust settles, because I don't understand the mentality that you could even. I don't know that I'm right. All I think I know is like that I don't know anything. I know that I don't know what's right for everyone because we're all
Mhm.
different, and I'm not gonna. I could say what works for me. I could say that like this works for me. I'm doing Wim Hof breathing. I'm doing ice baths. I'm on sober October right now, which I do feel oddly really kind of scattered right now, which is it sucks a little bit. But you're like saying all the right kind of the language that I'm familiar with and that I'm drawn to, and
Yeah, well, I mean, what you were talking about, like with Joseph Campbell, I mean, that's again like the power of myth, and one of those archetypical symbols is the Ouroboros, and it's the snake that eats its own tail, and eventually, even in all of our righteousness, thinking that we're right and imposing that on other people, eventually that logic, it comes back and it eats us, because
mm-hmm,
eventually everything eats itself. Once we begin that process of imposing our beliefs on other people, it eventually comes back, and I think probably that's eventually what we'll see is all of this righteousness, it
mm-hmm,
eventually, all of these things like cancel culture and all of these things, eventually the mob comes after you.
mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
that's
nobody's
eventually what happens.
because no one's perfect, and if I don't to think that you're the one perfect one with all the right answers. I mean, give me a break, bro. Like
Right.
you're 20, chill. But we all think that we're right when we're 20, maybe, which is unfortunate. But and then with social media, it kind of just exacerbates it a lot, all these opinions out into the universe and our culture, and just because they're out there doesn't mean that they're right, and just because there's a lot of people thinking the same thing doesn't mean that it's right. But they get validation, and then they start to think that they're right, and it justifies now having violence because of their righteousness. And I that's why I said I'm just gonna kind of like sit back from up here and wait till the dust settles, because I it seems to be insanity.
Mhm.
And so what can we do?
Yeah, and I think a lot is obviously what's brought into the limelight, and as you're saying, things like social media, it's very easy to criticize and to judge, but what are those people actually doing? If you're spending all your time on social media writing, critiques and judgment, you don't have a lot of time to actually go out and be the change. And I think people who really are successful and who do have a vision, they're busy. You're not going to be successful and actually making real change by criticizing and tearing down. It's a very different energy of being against something versus being for something. And when you're for something, you can actually take that and take that energy of, I believe in this. I want the world to be better in this way, and then to begin to create that. And it's just it's a very different thing of how we go about things. And uh, I think one of the real definitions of wisdom is being able to see things from the other side. And if we're constantly fighting against something and putting other people down, nothing good is created out of that. But if we can embody that wisdom and see things from another point of view, then we can actually move towards a place of union, towards a place of compassion, and through that place, that draws other people into our way of being. There's a much different energy when we're trying to create something and grow something and change, versus just telling other people what they should do or what they shouldn't do, and criticizing. So, but like all these things, I think it's also a natural progression and a natural change, and sometimes we just have to go through these these ways of being to really realize maybe this isn't working, and we do need to create something new, and create it from a different energy. I mean, I can't remember if that was Einstein who said something like, trying to do the same thing the same way and expecting different results is insanity. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's not helping anyone. And it's, like one of my most recent mottos is make people happy. Like that's my goal, is to just do what I can to make other people happy. As long as, it's not that hard to smile and be understanding and be compassionate, and just don't judge. Like, I remember I used to say this a lot because it's kind of from the Bible or whatever, like, judge not lest thou be judged. And you're going to be judged harshly because you're over here judging all these people. It's going to come back to you, but it's going to come back hard. It's not,
Mhm.
so watch what you ask for, and what you're asking for should not be other people to change. It's like, you be the change, you be the example, you be the light, the serpent. I love that etymology, rabbit hole you're going down. I think that's something like finding more meaning, finding the true understanding of like where it all began, of the words, and what's the true meaning. And how, because there's so much information out there, and let's go backwards. Don't try to, like, let's look inwards. Let's find the answers within, not fix the outside. You got to fix the inside first. And people got it backwards,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah,
Are
and these
you
are these,
Go
these are
ahead.
timeless principles also. I mean,
Yeah,
like you were saying, let him who is without sin cast the first stone, or the golden rule: treat others as you would like to be treated. And I think so many of us, we really forget that.
totally.
I mean, just even recently, with the thing with Trump and COVID. I mean, even if you completely disagree with that guy, I mean, I was looking on Facebook and just people laughing at him and wishing he would die. I
Ugh,
mean, that's just the height of
gross.
hypocrisy. I mean, you don't like him, so you're actually going to do far worse. You're wishing that he's dead, or you're mocking that he's sick. I mean, it's a very disturbing mentality, and it comes from exactly that, of actually not wanting to look within and see that the very things that we're judging him for doing, we're doing the same thing, and in many cases, far worse.
It's so, like, it's funny to me because I see that. I was like, the things you hate about him are in you. Like, you are those things. And that's a lot of times that, like, when we don't like someone, they're exhibiting traits that we have that we don't like about ourselves. And they don't see that they are those things that they don't like, that they see in him. And but they can't see that. And I kind of I don't laugh about it because it's getting really weird and gross. It's already beyond weird and gross. So it's not funny anymore that, you can be so hypocritical. It's like, please, somebody's like, help these people see themselves.
Yeah.
But
Well, that's one of the really powerful things that I think about plant work. And, plant work, it's not a panacea also. I mean, like anything, like jujitsu. I mean, you can show up to jujitsu once a week and kind of go half-ass, and you're going to get something, but you're not going to go very deep. And it's the same thing with plant work. I mean, even a lot of these things we were talking about, I see a lot of those qualities that people exhibit, even who've been doing this work for a long time. And I think a lot of the reason of that is they really haven't gone deep, because there's actually still a deep rooted fear of going deep. And it's very scary when we begin to lose that sense of self, that sense of identity. And that's why people do fight so hard to keep it alive, this idea that I'm right.
they're holding
Because
on. Yeah.
yeah, it's a holding on. But ultimately, if one does choose to go deep into this work, that's one of the archetypical things that this plant work really shows, is it does hold that mirror up, and it shows that all of these things that we're judging, all of these things that we don't like, inevitably they are things within ourselves that we haven't resolved. And that's really, really hard for people to hear, because it's so much easier to point the finger and say the problem is out there. It's this guy's fault. It's this structure's fault. It's, this societal thing's fault. But when we look in ourselves and we begin to resolve that within ourselves, we literally change the world, because that's one person now who's come to peace with that, who has a sense of wisdom of being able to see it from the other side. And then every action they take, every word they take, fosters that wisdom, that compassion, that understanding, and every person they touch feels that, is affected by that, and in that way it has a rippling effect. And
Hmm.
from my experience, that's truly the only way to change the world, is exactly as you said, is to be the change, to be the person that you're asking other people to be. I mean, this is a huge thing in relationships too, and certainly I'm no relationship expert, but it's a very similar thing we do. We judge our partner, we judge our family, and we say this person needs to do this thing for me to be happy. But
Hmm.
almost always, I'm not doing the very thing that I'm asking them to do. And if I can do that, then inevitably it fosters that change. It creates the environment that allows this thing that I'm looking for to actually be able to become manifest.
Uh, yeah, you have to be like, I have recently for kind of withdrawn from watching the news because it's so much hate mongering, especially for one particular side, which we won't say, but we all know. Um, and it's getting me riled up, and I'm getting like, you hypocrite, and so and the way the reptiles, whoever, whatever, they control us. The only way that happens is if we let them, we pay attention and we fall into the trap that they're setting, that is to set us all against each other on these, racism and sexism and, you're not American and all these things. It's like, if you pay attention to that and you get wrapped up into it, now you're in it, and the only way to get out of it is just to turn it off and go within, do your thing, get your hustle on, focus on your goals, your vision. I believe in magic to an extent. I believe the universe is far more capable than we have any awareness of, but we have like glimpses of it, and I've seen it in my own life by setting intentions and then achieving those, you know goals, and over and over and over again. And that's partly why I do this, is because I want to share that, like, I'm not special. I mean, as far as like, I'm not this, I don't have a high IQ, I'm not tall, I'm not great looking, I'm not any kind of special gift, other than maybe I have like I feel like my heart, I have like the heart of like Rocky Balboa and shit. Like, I'll get back up and keep fighting. But I'm also the underdog. And um I read this book called Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, which I highly recommend to people, because it lays out the principles of, what sets the people who are successful apart from those who are not. And it's not being smart. It's like, you don't have to go get the highest education. It's a way of doing things. It's a way of being. And it's laid out in the chapters about, do you want it bad enough? Are you going to do what it takes? And are you going to visualize it? Are you going to surround yourself with people that are like-minded and, going to cheer you on and not piss on your flame, and people don't know what to do. They're
Yeah, and
lost.
it takes a very strong person. I mean, I've even noticed that in myself. Is I started a podcast recently, and part of that is putting myself out there, putting other people out there, and with that, there's an inevitable criticism that's going to rise, and it's a very interesting balance. And I can see it in other people where, when there's this criticism, the natural reaction is to criticize back.
Mm-hmm.
But again, that just creates more of feeding that energy. And it's very difficult, even if someone criticizes me, I really have to sit with that and, okay, how can I respond in a way that's not feeding that's not doing the exact same thing? And how do I approach it from a quantumist point of view? And that's very difficult, and it takes a lot of principle and a lot of dedication. And as you said, it takes heart, it takes this real desire to go in and again to say, okay, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to act in that same way. And it's a difficult thing to do, but it does. It requires, I think, these things that you're talking about. What do we want? Dedicating ourselves to that, being the change, having a strong heart, and yeah, these are invaluable qualities.
They are. Are you in still? Where are you right now, physically
I'm
located?
in Peru. The last
Wow.
7 or 8 years, that's pretty much been my home. That's where I spend most of my time. But ever since the pandemic, basically Peru locked itself down. It's one of the more, if not the most strict lockdown, I think, in the world. And now it's also the country with the most excess deaths in the world too. So there's, I don't think that's a correlation. That's a direct causation. And I think there's a lot to be learned from that. But yeah, basically it's everything's been locked down. So I've been here ever since March. And it seems like just in the last day or two, there is some promising news that some international flights are probably going to begin to happen in the next couple weeks. So hopefully things begin to open up. But yeah, it's been kind of a crazy ride here.
Well, and I know we're coming up on our time and stuff, but I, like they're spreading this fear, and whether it's justified or not, like I think they're making it maybe worse than it had to be, and that is how they're trying to control us. And that's conspiracy. Maybe it's all, maybe there is no cabal of, overlords that are playing with the civilizations and toying with us, but I feel like something's very fishy up there.
Mm.
And um to shut the whole world down over this thing that is just life, it's part of life, which is death. And you can't stop life, but to save a couple of lives, it's like then we all die. Like you just said something about in Peru, the most excess deaths because of the shutdown. It's like, it's backfiring. It's like, come on, like it's
Yeah,
not
I mean
working.
that was my thought since the beginning. It's just it's very short-sighted thinking, and again, who knows? I don't
Yeah,
know. I don't think anyone
that's true.
really knows. But at the end of the day, you're probably familiar with Tom Woods. He's a big
Mm-hmm.
libertarian guy, but
Mm-hmm.
he had a post which I don't think I'll be able to summarize it exactly, but essentially saying, how are we shutting down the world based on one viewpoint, which is a
Mm-hmm.
epidemiological viewpoint, which even that viewpoint isn't shared by all epidemiologists. What about economists? What about social workers?
Mm-hmm.
What about environmentalists? What about mothers and fathers? And the world is such a complex place, and again, to take these drastic measures to seemingly try and help in this one area, it's just, I think it's this really common human thing where we think we know and we think we can control, but we don't realize all of the repercussions that has. And yeah, probably a lot came from, again, good people trying to do good, but
Mm-hmm.
as it's very famously said, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. But certainly, even that kind of more conspiratorial way of thinking. I mean, I it just so many things reminded me of things in the past, like the war on terror. I mean, very similar propaganda. And even before that, wars in general, it's always the same thing. It's like, give government more powers so that we can protect you because you don't have the ability to do it yourself. Therefore, we need to defeat this enemy and then the world will be better. But as we all know, one war leads to another. I think eventually people started catching on to that. And then there's this new war, which is the war on terror. And that's an even better war because it's not just one isolated group. It's kind of this thing that's just out there and it can be anywhere. And it gives government more power, and Patriot Act and things like that. And it's just this slow form of control. And again, probably a lot is in good intention, but for sure a lot is for nefarious reasons too. And then with this virus, yeah, again, who knows? Maybe it was completely random. Maybe it was released on purpose. But either way, I think we're seeing that same mentality. It's again that there's a war on the virus. It's an even greater war because it's not any country, it's not any people. It's just this thing that's in the ether, and we may never be able to fully cure it. And again, more draconian measures to fight it. And it's again, I think it gets back to this idea of fear, which is such a strong emotion. Most of these things people would not be willing to do if they weren't afraid. And but that fear is such a powerful thing. I mean, people are willing to do or to give up so many things when they don't think that they have the answers, or they don't think they have the ability to to lead their lives in the way that they choose. And with that, again, whether it's a concerted effort or just random, it's just throughout history that it's a rife opportunity for our freedoms and our liberties to be infringed upon. And it's also just a natural cycle of human history. I mean, these things, they always come, and it takes us all to really look inside and say, what are our principles? What are we willing to stand up for? And again, like we were talking about earlier, it's much easier to tear things down, to criticize, than to actually take a stand and say, no, look, this is what I believe in. I believe in this principle. I believe that I should be able to live my life how I want, as long as I'm not affecting other people. And
Period. Like
yeah.
freedom, like it's being taken away, and it's not, people don't seem to care, but and it's going to be too late when every fucking part of our life is under scrutiny and watched and controlled, like, and you're not gonna be happy. Like, other countries they have people watching them. And like, I was watching Chernobyl the other night, and
Mhm.
the Russian KGB is like following everyone and make sure you don't say the wrong thing, and or you're gonna be put in jail. And like, that's looks as though that's the direction we're headed. And like, I'm like, please somebody stop this before this. Can we just be free again? Like, why is this happening? Like, who? And I don't understand the nefarious reasons as to why that would be beneficial for whoever's at top, other than just ego and control and power and I guess money or whatever. But it's yeah, it's moving in a bad direction. And they're trying to keep us separated. Like, if we could all just agree that it's not us, these minor differences on fucking gender bathrooms, and like, who gives a, like, in the grand scheme of things, we're fighting over really kind of small issues, when the main issue that's we should be concerned about is our freedom. And you're in Peru, and you're doing these ceremonies, and you're helping people find themselves and come to probably some sort of peace within themselves. And I'm over here selling underwear, and we're trying to figure out the world's problems. But it's important. And I think and more of us need to express this in a way that's understandable to everyone. And I guess we just have to keep trying to promote freedom. Like why, I don't know why that's so hard for people to get on board with, but it's fear, and it's the fear. And so
It is.
hopefully, yeah.
And that's, that's why it's so important. I mean, even the founding fathers, they said very clearly, this is something that constantly you're going to have to fight for, because it's a natural principle that there are forces, there's human desire, things that try and take those away. I mean, it's not some weird thing. You can see that in so many different forms. But that's why I think principles are so important. If you have a principle, then you can stand up for that. And sometimes that's really hard when the winds are blowing and the earth is seemingly falling apart. It's very easy to let go of those principles, but that's the time where you have to even stand by them more. And I think, so much is education and these things we're talking about, things like jujitsu, like that will teach you principles. There's no bullshit in jujitsu. You can have an idea that, a 200-pound guy is no stronger than a 100-pound guy, but you'll realize very soon that's not true.
Right.
That's not true. That's one of the laws of nature. And all of these things, these idea of freedom, we're very lucky to have been born in a country where that exists. And I think many people would really benefit in educating themselves in that. And that's one of the benefits of travel and living somewhere else, is you really see how good we have it. I mean, I think something a lot of people take for granted is, in the US, you don't have to talk to a police officer. That's an amazing right that we have. You don't have to show your ID. There is probably no other country in the world where that's the case. Here in Peru, if a police officer comes up to me and he asks for my ID, I have to show it. And essentially, I have to do whatever he says. That is not liberty. That's living under an authoritarian regime. And yeah, I think that's something that a lot of these lockdowns have shown is, there was guys with AK-47s walking around, and if you didn't obey the curfew, you were subject to their will. And that idea of freedom, it's something that so many people have sacrificed. I mean, so many immigrants, slaves, all of these people, ultimately they were working to create a society that gave us this real privilege that we live in today. And it's certainly not to say everyone is born equal. We're all in different circumstances. None of us are equal. We're
Right.
all
Right.
different, but we
Hmm.
have an opportunity, and we have these principles and these laws, Constitution, Declaration, that give us this amazing ability to truly create our lives. And I think that is something worth fighting for. And if we
Absolutely.
don't, realize how important that is, then it will fall away. And eventually we will end up, in a place like Russia or Cuba, where, in Cuba, you can't leave the country. You're not allowed. And, people like to idealize these places, but
Hmm.
anyone who's lived there, spent time there, it's not, it's a pretty bad place to live. You don't have the resources to even feed yourself properly. And,
Yeah. People want
and
this utopia, but it's not real.
yeah,
I mean, we lived, I mean, in the greatest utopia probably, on earth. But it seems to be, sorry, and I cut you off. It seems to be being like taken away slowly over time. And I feel like people are going to, at some point, somebody's going to like band together and be like, no, this isn't happening. We're taking it
yeah.
back.
Well, and it often takes, I think, like I was saying, that symbol of the Ouroboros, it often takes you to be directly affected by that before we realize, oh, okay, maybe this has gone too far.
Hmm.
Once the police or the KGB or the authorities come for you or for me, then it's like, oh, oh, maybe this isn't good now. And we see it, like we were mentioning before, cancel culture. It's like a lot of these people who were so pro canceling everyone, all of a sudden then that mob comes for them, and it's like, oh wait, oh shit, wait, I actually created this. I supported
Exactly.
that, but now it's coming for me. So that's where, again, I think principles are just they're so important. And it's I mean, from what I understand of your podcast, that's one of the main things is how to be successful. And
Hmm.
I think that's really one of the key things is to have principles and to stand by those. There's a great book written by Ray Dalio, who's the head of the biggest hedge fund in the world, called Bridgewater, and he wrote a whole book called Principles. And it's a really fascinating thing, and that's what really led to his success. Was he stood by his principles, and he actually created this very interesting company that's based on meritocracy. And I think that's such a fascinating idea, because again, you can look at social media and there's all these pundits, and they make all these predictions and they don't come to pass, but then they keep getting to make the predictions and people listen to them. And I think that's the beautiful thing about a meritocracy is it's, in his company, he measures all of these things. Like every conversation is recorded and there's metrics, and it's like we get to see, like, okay, well, was that person right? If they were right about something, then their merit increased, and it's a very scientific thing. It's one of the laws of nature, like that which works, that which succeeds rises above. And I think that's just a beautiful way of being. But that also takes principles, of saying, this is what I believe in. I believe in freedom of speech. And, even when the Nazi comes and starts spouting ridiculous stuff, well, what's my principle? If I believe in freedom of speech, then that's also freedom of speech for him. But once we get away from that, and once we say, oh well, the Nazi needs to be censored, and many people could see that, they could say,
Right.
oh well, yeah, I can kind of understand that. That's hate rhetoric. But you've just given someone else the power, and then eventually they're going to censor something else, someone else, something else, and eventually that comes for you. And that's the end of freedom. Once you put a limit, or once you get away from that principle, then the principle's gone.
It's already happening, and it's so gross. And I really hope that we can just get back to, like, let the hate mongers say what they were going to say, unless they are being violent, or maybe, like, growing in numbers so large that another force needs to step up and stop them. Like, that's another story. But right, like, just because someone says something, you can't, because it's a slippery slope. You stop him, like you said. Anyways,
Yeah, it's a slippery slope, and also it's a very patronizing thing, because it's essentially saying, I need to censor this person because I know they're wrong, but everyone else is too dumb, and
yes,
they don't know that they're wrong. Therefore, I need to censor the speech.
right.
And so it's
Like
coming
they're
from
the
this.
savior.
Right, exactly. And again, if that idea is so bad and so atrocious, then the better ideas will come to surface because they're better ideas. And that's where things like trust and faith come in. I think so much of that idea is actually this lack of a better position. It's coming from, I don't actually know how to produce a better position, therefore I'm going to censor them.
Yep.
But it's really this intellectual kind of escape, instead of doing the work and showing, here's where this person is wrong, here's a better way. And when people hear that, people are smart, people are intelligent, and when they hear that, then they'll realize that, and then that bad idea just it dies off. And that's how nature works. Again, if there's something that's not functioning, if there's something that's not in harmony, if there's something that's not true, it passes, and that which is true lives and thrives.
This isn't how to thrive or live. I want harmony and love and community and freedom, not the opposite of all those things. And if we can all just, I think we all agree, except some people are just like, they're mental right now. And I think it stems in part from their hate of Trump, and it's just like exacerbated to this just overblown, and that's the only reason why. Because I don't hate him, I'm not particularly fond of him, I used to think he was the man. I used to want to be on The Apprentice. I used to want to be a big baller like Trump and shit. But and I kind of, I'm on my way. I'm doing my thing. I'm doing it my way. I'm not womanizing and stuff. But it's overblown. That hate is like, it's just made them like mental, and that's the only reason I would want kind of him to lose right now, is just because, but it's not fair, because to want him to lose so that they're all had to appease these people. But it's like, that would be one reason I'd be like, okay, if he loses, at least maybe it'll kind of go back to normal a little bit. But that's where
Yeah.
I'm at.
But potentially not, because again, that mentality is still there, and it's still this us versus them, and
it might embolden it, right? They'll be like, we won, and they take more power and shit.
Well, and it's a classic way. It's divide and conquer, and as long as people remain divided, then it's very easy again to continue to infringe upon all these things like civil liberties and freedoms. And I think, as you said, at the root, everyone wants the same thing. People all over the world, they want the same thing. They want peace. They want to have a family. They want to be able to make a living and have a good life, and they don't want conflict. But it's when we see the other person as the enemy, the person that's standing in the way of that, then there's always going to be conflict. But if we can come together and see that, that other person is just like me, maybe they have different views. Of course, they're going to have different views. Everyone has different views, but that doesn't make them evil. That doesn't make them an enemy that I have to fight and overcome. And again, just standing in these principles of, okay, like let me live my life and you live your life, and in the end we come together and we help each other in the ways we can, and in the ways we disagree, we do our own things.
Thank you, Jason. That was a perfect way to conclude this conversation. I think I know we didn't get too much into ayahuasca, but it's out there. People, look into it. It's a medicine that can kind of help you see. You want to tell them, like, real quick? I do got to run pretty quick, but like, why would they want to do that?
Well, like we were talking about earlier, I think these plants, they've been around probably, I mean, almost assuredly even before humans, but I think there's been a symbiotic evolution with humans, and like I was saying, I think it's an integral part of actual human history and religion and spirituality. And I think a lot of these plants, like ayahuasca or mushrooms, tobacco, they give us an opportunity to experience something that we're not able to experience in our day-to-day lives. We're in this reality, we're bound by space and time and these natural laws, birth and death, and our senses, our sensory perceptions. But I think what these plants do is they put us into a state where we go beyond that, where we're able to perceive things which, in many ways we know scientifically are there. A good example is like the light spectrum. Like, we can't see X-rays, and yet we know it's there. So we know there are things that are beyond our perception. And I think what these plants do is they really allow us to enter that space. And in that space where we're not bound by these things, there's this tremendous potential to heal and to know and to understand and to gain wisdom, and ultimately to find peace within ourselves. And it's not an easy process. It's often quite the opposite. It's one of the more difficult things someone will ever do, because it's really going in and seeing within ourselves all of these areas that are out of balance, out of alignment, where we're holding on to beliefs and judgments and angers and resentments and all of these things. And it gives us the ability to make peace with that and to emerge from that. And I think, again, that's why many of these plants are described as this death-like state, because we go into this death-like state where we begin to let go. We begin to let go of all of these things that are holding us back. and with that dying, there's a rebirth. There's an emerging out of that as a person who's much more strong and humble and grateful and compassionate. And yeah, so I think it really it's this amazing gift that humanity has been given. And I think a lot of us we've forgotten it for various reasons. There's been persecution and just the way we've evolved as societies. But I think there's a real remembering, and people are coming back to that. And a lot of that is again coming from our own suffering, from our this sense of something is off, of I'm not happy, of what's my purpose in life, and through that kind of suffering or questioning, I think a lot of people come to this plant medicine, and there can be really amazing transformations. And I think we're really on a precipice right now. Of I think this work is already really expanding all over the world, and I think in the coming years and decades, it's going to continue down that path.
I hope that's the path and not the path we're seeing on the news. This is awesome. But what's your podcast? Your new podcast?
Yeah, I started about 2 months ago, and it's called The Universe Within, and it's on all the major things: Apple Podcasts, Spotify. There's a YouTube version, and it's really something I had seen. You mentioned guys like Joe Rogan, and I think some of the good ambassadors of really bringing this work to light. But something that I had noticed is it was mainly people who had maybe had an experience and were talking about it, but there wasn't really, from what I had seen, a forum of people who are really deeply involved in this work, the doctors, the healers, the people who are really doing this work day in and day out. And so the idea was really just to give them a platform to share their insights, their experience, and their knowledge and understanding, so that hopefully as this work does get out there, these voices are really able to kind of shape and to guide and to help this work move forward in the best way.
Do you know Hamilton Souther from Blue Morpho? Have you heard of him?
I know of him. Yeah, I don't know
That's
him
all.
personally.
Oh yeah. I actually did meet him. I went to one of his retreats, but it was here in Colorado, and it was like a weed kind of ceremonial experience. But I just imagine he would maybe be someone that you would have on the show. And I was gonna say we could do like a crossover, but I'm not in that realm per se. But I have done it. But I'm not like living in that. But I'm sure there's a lot of wisdom coming out of that then if you're interviewing people that have really dived deep. So everyone check that out, The Universe Within here. Like you said, it's available everywhere. Thank you, Jason, for coming on here. It's been a true pleasure. I would love to have you back on honestly, because I feel like we could go on again, like, and get into some more depth. So
it was my pleasure, man. Thanks for having me. And I wish you all the best in your work. And I think you're doing a good thing. And it's great to have, these voices getting out there and talking about these things. So I wish you all the best. And let's do it again sometime.
Okay. I like it. And I wish you the best too. And thank you everyone for listening. Robert Patton Global podcast, sponsored by SHEATH Underwear. Check it out. It's pretty good. People seem to like it. And when you get in back to the States, if you want to hit me up, I'll send you a nice care package.
Oh, that'd be great, man. I'd love that. Some new clothes is long overdue. So
hey, okay. Well, we'll make that happen. Thank you, everyone. Peace and love.